Alrighty, we are back with Outlier by Lisa Beeson, Chapter 6. The Epsom bath and Gemma's breakfast did wonders in soothing her sore muscles and renewing some of her energy. Ari didn't know how she was going to do this all again tomorrow. Cam and Ari shuffled like they were on a death march, up the back staircase Gemma told them led from the basement up to their rooms, to get any identification they had before going to Kale's study. The last person they wanted to see was him, but orders were orders, and Ari promised to be obedient, so she would do as she was told. But she had some questions that needed to be answered in order for that arrangement to continue. Ari went into her room and looked through her gray backpack for the fake passport Cass had given her. That's when she remembered that she had Cam's money and his grandfather's old army knife from when she sifted into their old apartment. She chuckled to herself at the memory of slipping in and out right under the suit's noses. She gathered his things and her passport and walked down the hall to Cam's room. The door was open, but she knocked anyway. His room was a mirrored layout of hers, but instead of wallpaper, his walls were painted a robin's egg blue, and his bed linens were beige, not lavender like hers. He also had a similar pile of bags and boxes of clothes shoved into the corner. Cam was standing by his bed sorting out his wallet when he heard her knock, and he looked up and smirked. "I guess I don't need half the crap I have in here anymore," he said, holding up a sandwich card from a deli down the street from Hawk's shop. He tossed it onto the bed atop a small pile of similar cards. She fought the stab of guilt that ran through her. "Sorry, I forgot to give you your money and knife," she said, holding them out to him. Cam put his fake ID in his pocket and took the money clip and the knife from her. "That's all right. Getting shot and fleeing across the ocean can be pretty distracting," he said with his impish smile. "Besides, I knew they were in good hands." He tossed the money onto the bed and then took the knife out of its sheath slowly, as though it was very precious. "I wouldn't trust just anybody with my lucky knife." He walked over to show her the initials, LC, etched into the pommel. "My great-grandfather's name was Lucas Corso. This was his knife from World War II. It's a great story, if you want to hear it," he asked, sitting down on the bed. "Yeah, sure. I love family stories," she said, thinking of all the great stories her dad told her about him and his brothers growing up. "Cool. Well, Lucas's parents came to America from Italy back in the early 1900s. His mother wanted to name him after his father, Luca, but his father wanted him to have a more American-sounding name, so they named him Lucas instead. Lucas absolutely loved life. He ate up every experience he could get his hands on, and basically Forrest Gumped his way across the country from New York to California, if Forrest Gump was a charismatic Italian-American with no mental deficiencies." Ari laughed. Before the war, Lucas had been a shoe shiner, a watch salesman, a carny worker, a ranch hand, and a photographer. And that was all before he was 25. Anyway, when he was working as a photographer in San Francisco, he met the love of his life, Estelle. He would stake out a place on the sidewalk and take pictures of her when she walked by. Eventually, with his natural charm and charisma, he wooed the crap out of her, and they got married, ready to live out their happily ever after. Then America joined World War II, and Lucas thought, "Hey, why not become a kick-ass soldier and fight for this great country that's been so good to me?" I'm paraphrasing, of course. Ari grinned and nodded. Of course. So he joined up and got shipped off to the South Pacific. He met this really smart guy in his unit named Luke Cross. Lucas thought it was a good omen that they had crazy similar names, so he used that Corso charisma of his and convinced Luke to become his best friend. It was a real odd couple sort of friendship. They ended up saving each other over and over again. Lucas's fly-by-the-seat-of-your-pants shenanigans would always get them in trouble, and Luke would always figure out a way to get them out of it. And they'd end up saving everyone's butts. Then one day, their squad was trying to secure a strategically important bridge, but the Japanese had other ideas. The Americans were outmanned and outgunned, and their squad was getting decimated. It was chaos. American soldiers going down all around them, and somehow Lucas and Luke were the only ones left to defend the bridge. So while Luke was rigging up a truck full of explosives, Command told them that if they couldn't have the bridge, then no one would. Lucas kind of went temporarily insane and tried to single-handedly take on the enemy, all while screaming for vengeance for his fallen comrades. Total Rambo style. He emptied clip after clip at the bastards, keeping them at bay, but it put a big target on himself. When Luke saw what Lucas was doing, he ran from the truck to save his friend, and he got shot in the knee and his chest for his trouble. When Lucas's blood rage faded and he realized what happened to Luke, he dropped his gun and dragged his friend to safety behind the truck at the end of the bridge. Luke's knee was shattered, and he had a sucking chest wound. His lung was punctured. The shooting had stopped, which meant the Japanese were coming to claim the bridge. The only weapons they had now were one grenade, the explosive-laden truck, and Lucas's army-issued knife. He got it out and held it out as a last defense for him and his dying blood brother. Luke knew he didn't have much time left, so he gathered up all the breath he had left, got Lucas's attention, and asked, "Do you know what our names mean?" Understandably confused, Lucas answered, "What? No, stop talking, you idiot. Your lung is bleeding." At this point, I imagine Luke dramatically coughed up some blood. Then he grasped Lucas's hand that was holding the knife and wheezed, "It means light. Transit umbra elu perstat. I'll fight by your side always, brother." Then the light left his eyes, and he died. Lucas swallowed his despair and waited for the enemy to reach the bridge. Then he went into full badass mode and took out 6 men with just his knife and his rage. He swore that he felt Luke beside him, protecting him and making his arms strong. Then, when he thought he'd do the most damage to the enemy, he put his knife away, pulled the pin to the grenade, and chucked it at the truck and ran. The truck exploded, destroying the bridge and propelling Lucas into the river onto debris. Unconscious, he floated out to sea, where he was picked up by some Burmese fishermen. They nursed him back to health. Being absolutely done with war and the go-with-the-flow kind of guy he was, he worked from fishing boat to fishing boat until he was finally able to get back to California and was able to reunite with Estelle. She had never given up hope, even though they had told her that he was dead. My Gramps was born 9 months later, and they named him Lucas Cross Corso. When Gramps was drafted to go to Vietnam, Lucas told him the story of the knife. He had burned the Latin phrase that Luke had said to him into the hilt. It means, "Shadow passes, light remains," R.A. whispered, running her fingers over the letters. Cam looked at her in surprise. "You know Latin?" R.A. shrugged her shoulders. "I went through a language phase a couple years ago." Cam slowly blinked his eyes and sputtered. But who goes through a language phase?" Ari just shrugged again in response. Cam shook his head. "Okay, anyway, Lucas gave Gramps the knife and told him to always keep it with him, and it'll get him back home. So Gramps, in typical son fashion, said something like, 'Sure, whatever you say, Pops.' He was a bit more pragmatic than his dad, and knew that he was prone to exaggerate details to tell a good story. But he took it anyway and promised to keep it with him. While he was in Vietnam, he managed to get out of a lot of sticky situations he had no business getting out of. But that's a whole other story. I'll tell you about that another time. Anyway, he thought maybe there was really something to this lucky knife thing. And sometimes when the night was the darkest, he'd take it out and read the inscription over and over. And he'd make it to the light of another day. Well, needless to say, he made it home and decided to go on a hippie backpacking trip across the country to clear his head. A year later, he came back married to Grams, who was pregnant with my mom. Estelle was kind of pissed they missed out on the wedding, but Lucas, being the awesome guy he was just glad Gramps was home and said that Grams and my mom were the greatest travel souvenirs ever. And since the meaning of names is kind of a big deal for my family, Gramps and Grams decided to name her Aurora, which is Latin for the goddess of the dawn, since my mom was the dawning light of a new generation. That's why my mom wanted my middle name to be Lucas, and another reason she kept the name Miles. When you put them together, my name means Soldier of Light, which I always thought was pretty cool. Cam looked down at the knife in his hands. On my 14th birthday, Graham gave me the knife with a letter Gramps had written to me the day I was born, a couple years before he died. It basically said the story I just told you, and that I should trust my instincts. He said as long as I follow the light, they'll never steer me wrong. Cam looked up at Ari. That's why I'm not bummed about leaving Chicago. I knew from the first moment I saw you that the next course of my life would take was going to be by your side. I felt it in my bones, and they haven't steered me wrong yet. Ari looked into his eyes and felt the intentions behind his words. She was the light he was following. The weight of the total trust he had in her laid heavily on her shoulders. She could barely guide herself, let alone someone else. The moment was becoming a bit intense, so she broke eye contact and looked down at her shoes. Cam stood up and ruffled her hair. Sorry to say, but you're stuck with me, stinkface, he teased, putting the knife back in its sheath and grabbing his money. He put them both in the drawer of his nightstand. We better get down there. We don't want to keep Mr. Grumpy Pants waiting. He might make us take laps around his office. They hobbled down the stairs and knocked on the doors to Cale's study. They heard his voice say, "Come in," so they pushed the double doors open and walked in. Cale sat at a large mahogany desk that was illuminated by the sunlight coming through the leaded glass window, with what looked to be a family crest of a lion standing on its hind legs. She figured that it must belong to one of the previous owners. He was busy typing away and looking at the 3 computer monitors on the desk in front of him. Without looking up, he said, "You two certainly took your time." "It took a while to recuperate from this morning," Ari countered as she looked around the room. She noticed that the path of Cale's energy signature went through the back out of one of the bookcases. Intrigued, she looked through the bookcase and saw what looked like a secret spy room. There was all kinds of super high-tech equipment in there, and monitors that showed views from all over the property and inside Artemir. She also saw a spiral staircase, which she figured led up to Cale's private rooms. Whoa! But she was snapped back to attention when Cale cleared his throat. "Find something interesting over there?" Ari refocused onto Cale, who was looking at her through curious, narrowed eyes. I was just wondering what was behind the bookcase," she said while trying to hide behind her poker face. He already knew she could see paths, but hopefully she could hide the fact that she already knew what was back there. He assessed her a bit longer before answering. "It's my surveillance room." Cam's mouth hung open in shock and his eyes lit up with pure glee. "What? That's awesome! Can we see it?" "No," Cale said flatly, as he pushed back from his desk to get a large envelope from one of the drawers and motioned them over. They disappointedly walked over, and Cale held out his hand for their identification. Ari handed over the passport, and Cam gave him the fake ID that said his name was Cam Podowski, and that he was 23 years old. Psst, nice try, Cam. "Where did Podowski come from?" she asked. Cam grinned self-consciously. There were these super hot triplets from my old school with the last name Podowski, and everyone called them Tripod. He shrugged. "I don't know, it was the first thing that popped in my head, and I thought it sounded authentic." Ari just shook her head, and Cale put the passport and the ID on his desk, and then handed them some of the contents from the envelope. "These are your new identities. I am now officially your guardian, and you two are now British, French, Italian, German, and Danish citizens as well." No wonder his accent is so muddled. "Wow, that was fast. How'd you manage all that in a couple days?" Cam asked, counting the different passports. "I have connections. So, should we start calling you Daddy Warbox from now on?" Cam joked. "I wouldn't," Cale warned. Ari looked down at her multinational passports. They all said that she was born in Baltimore, Maryland, and her name was Ariadne Cale. and they all had the same picture from the passport Cass had given her, except now it looked like she had dark brown eyes. Weird. Cam's eyes widened as he was looking at his passports. Hey, how'd you get the picture from my ID? I made a copy while you were sleeping, Cale said nonchalantly. But that means... Ari put a hand on his arm and just shook her head to tell him not to bother. Cale had already admitted to going through her bag to steal her green stone, so what was to keep him going through Cam's wallet as well? They just had to get used to the fact that they had absolutely no privacy if Cale was around. Cam looked over at the passport Ari had open. What kind of name is Ariadne? And how come she has your last name and I don't? He asked as he showed Ari his passport. Cameron Jones? Ari answered the first question. Ariadne is from Greek mythology. She gave Theseus what he needed to find his way back out of the Minotaur's labyrinth. I hear barking. She looked into Cale's greenish-blue opalescent eyes. She didn't know if he was trying to be poetic, drawing a parallel between the Greek story and how she was helping him find what he needed to get home, or if it was just a coincidence. But as usual, she couldn't get anything from him, which frustrated her. Cale stared back at her, unfazed by her questioning glare, and then glanced over at Cam. This is the story we're going to go with. Ari is the daughter of my American cousin, who unfortunately died with his wife in a car accident. By the time I found out about it, Ari was already in the foster care system and in the custody of child abusers. His eyes flicked over to Cam's now yellowing black eye. I gained custody and brought her back here. What about me? How do I fit in? Cam asked, perplexed. She refused to leave the country without her foster brother, so being the generous man I am, I gained custody of you as well. Of course you'd make yourself like the hero. Okay, dog's barking. One moment. Okay, we're back. Of course you'd make yourself look like the hero. Cam rolled his eyes, then looked back down at his new name. Cameron Jones, he said, sounding disappointed. She gets Ariadne, and I get Cameron Jones? It's so boring. It's like you didn't even try. To limit confusion, I chose names that you could still use your nicknames with. You couldn't have gone with something more interesting, like Camuel or Camathy, or even Camaximus? Ari couldn't help the snort that came out of her nose as she laughed at the name Camaximus, which made them both crack up. Cale was not impressed, though. It will serve its purpose. He took back the passports and put them back in his desk. They will stay with me for safekeeping. He looked back over at Cam. Go ask Gemma for some cleaning supplies so you can clean up that mess you made in the gym. Cam huffed out a less than enthusiastic, fine, and then shuffled out of the room to go find Gemma. Since he had gone back to his monitors and started typing again, Ari stayed where she was waiting for Cale to pay attention to her. You can leave. I'm done with you for now. Ari squared her shoulders. Well, I'm not done with you. He glanced over at her and raised one of his eyebrows questioningly, as if he was saying, Oh, really? She took a deep breath and pressed on. I have some questions that have been bugging me, and I've been keeping my half of the bargain, so now you need to keep yours. Cale sighed. He leaned back in his chair, resting his elbows on the armrests and interlocking his fingers. What's pressing on that mind of yours, girlie? Ari tamped down her annoyance and continued on. How come I can't read your intentions like I can everyone else? I can always tell what strong emotions people are feeling and what they really mean behind their words. But not you. It's like you're a brick wall. Cale smirked. Humans broadcast everything like a radio tower. I was taught to guard myself more fully, so don't even try. Okay. So can you read me? Only what you show on your face, but generally, no, I can't, he said shortly, and Ari could tell that it bothered him. Good. You would think growing up around humans that you would have picked up their bad habits, but you are well protected. What does that mean? He pointed at her head. Your runes were obviously done by a master. I recognize the basics of what you would consider a protection rune, but there were intricacies and nuances to the design that I've never seen before. Whoever did it was so advanced that they were able to make up their own rune, and they wanted you to be hard to find. I assume that's why I can't track your energy signature. It's being hidden by this rune. Pieces were beginning to add up. Maybe this was why I don't emit radiant energy like everyone else. It isn't because I lack it. It's because it's hidden. She remembered Walter, the old street performer back in Savannah, had said something to that effect. He had told her it was like she was wearing a cloak that was covering it up. And when Cass tried to see into her mind, she said it was like Ari was covered in armor that she couldn't get through unless she let her in. Which meant that the rune wasn't impenetrable. Ari was able to let people in if she wanted to. Interesting. Did you recognize any other runes? She asked curiously. It was hard to get a good look at all of them, but I was able to recognize one more. A disguising rune, like the one I have here, he said, pointing to a rune on his forearm. It looked like a strange mixture of a picked symbol and a diagram of a circuit. A disguising rune? What does that mean? Ari panicked. Please don't tell me we really look like those little green aliens with the big heads, or reptile people. Kale laughed at the horror on her face. Relax. Ions and Dazen are what you would call humanoid in appearance. The rune only modifies the pigment in skin and hair. Ions have a luminescent golden cast to their complexion, and Dazen skin has copper undertones. Most Dazen also have an unmistakable blue, green, and purple sheen to their hair, which refracts in the light. Unfortunately, they couldn't disguise that completely from your hair, and they couldn't do anything about your eyes. He ruminated as he stared at her with his calculating, narrowed eyes, like she was an impossible puzzle that he couldn't quite understand. They still give you away as a hybrid. I'm curious what your true appearance is, though. Me too. Is it permanent? How long do runes last? Kale took a deep breath, trying to figure out how to explain it in a way she'd understand. Different runes have what you would call different shelf lives. Okay, Ari said slowly, trying to follow. For example, that healing rune I gave you only works once. You put it on, it does its job, that's it. Then there are some runes that can last your whole life. And some, like the disguising rune, last only as long as you need them to. You just have to negate them by adding certain details to the design. Or if the design is interrupted or broken, the rune won't work. A shadow passed over his eyes for a second. If Ari had blinked, she would have missed it. There's an exact science to it. I can only guess at what the other runes on your head mean or how long they will last. But for now, they seem to be helping you, so it's best to leave them be. Ari looked at the colorful iridescent designs she could see marking up his forearms and at the base of his neck and asked, How did you get away with all those tattoos when you first got here? I mean, only sailors and circus people had tattoos back then, right? I stood out at first, he admitted, until I met a theater actress who taught me how to use stage makeup and other tricks of the trade, he said with a small smile and a far-off look in his eyes. It's been nice over the last 10 years or so that the stigma around tattoos has lessened. It saved me a lot of time and headaches. As Ari thought over everything he had told her, something kept bothering her. You said the key ingredient to make the runes work was Leviathan, right? He nodded. I've never heard of it. Is it found on Earth? It's not naturally found here, no. That's why most of the colonists left when the Anakanai cut backing for the outpost. There would be no more imports of Leviathan. The Ions aren't the only higher race that uses it. Then, how do you have it? I doubt the slavers that dumped you off here let you keep any of it. I took some off of one of the crew members before they dropped me off. I should have known he'd stolen it. But that was more than 60 years ago. How much do you have left? She asked. He let out a breath through his nose and looked her in the eyes. None. I used the last bit I had on you, so let's hope you're worth the investment. Ari's left hand unconsciously reached for where the healing rune was on her right shoulder blade. The Leviathan is all gone. No more get-out-of-death-free cards. No wonder he was training her so hard. There was no way to save her if something bad happened again. He nodded his head, satisfied that she realized the seriousness of the matter. So as you now know, time is of the essence. The sooner we find the remaining stones, the better. Is that all you wanted to know? He asked impatiently, wanting to get back to what he was working on. No. Back in Chicago, you said that my aging would slow down and the extent of my abilities would manifest when I reached maturity. Well, I was wondering when that would be. I mean, at what age does that usually happen? Cale looked at her for a minute, thoughtfully rubbing his chin before answering. It's different for everyone, but if I had to put it in human years, I'd say it usually happens anywhere between the ages of 16 and 21. Though with your mixed heritage, who's to say? You're an anomaly. It could be tomorrow or 10 years from now. Oh, she mumbled, not wanting to show him how much it bothered her when he pointed out that she shouldn't exist and was the only one of her kind. But I'd prefer it if you referred to me as an outlier instead of an anomaly. It sounds better, she shrugged uncertainly. More like I'm just unique instead of a mistake. I should tell you, though, that reaching maturity for the Ions and the Dyson isn't the same as the awkward pubescence that humans experience. The physiology is different. How? Ari could tell by his body language that he was becoming increasingly more uncomfortable with this conversation. And to be honest, so was she. But he was the only one on Earth that was even remotely similar to her, so she had to know. Believe me, if there was anyone else that could tell me this stuff, I'd ask them. But since you're the only one who would know... His face became shuttered, and he let out a resigned sigh. Like I said, you're an outlier, he conceded. This is all just conjecture when it comes to you. But the Ions and the Dyson are not able to reproduce until they reach full maturity. Since we have such long lifespans, nature counters this with the resultant possibility of overpopulation by allowing the females to be fertile only once every cycle. Unlike humans, who are vastly more fertile than we are. This is something the colonists didn't account for at first, so I wouldn't be surprised if a bit of higher race DNA was in the genome of all modern humans by this point. And a cycle is roughly 10 human years? Ari mused out loud, and he nodded. You will not, he cleared his throat uncomfortably, ovulate like human adolescents. But you will continue to grow and to develop into your adult form until you reach maturity, at which point you will essentially go through a complete molecular metamorphosis, and it is actually quite a painful experience. Painful? Okay, maybe I don't want to reach maturity anytime soon. You'll have plenty of time to be an adult. Childhood is sacred and fleeting. You should cherish it. He looked down impatiently at his watch. Is there anything else I can help you with? No, I'm done. For now, she said, still trying to wrap her mind around everything he had just said. Having a former nurse as a mother, she thought she had knew in exact detail about everything she would go through with puberty and all that. But now, she knew that she was even more different than she had already thought, and since her existence was supposedly impossible, Ari realized that nobody really knew anything about her, making her feel even more of an outlier than ever. Cale turned back to his monitors. She was dismissed. And that was the end of Chapter 6. I know I should probably be doing my other channels and reading more Twilight, but Outlier! It's Outlier! and I love this book. So we're just gonna keep doing this. And since I don't have any people watching or subscribing to judge and complain yet, I guess I can just keep doing this book. That's the plan. Yep. Okay, that's all. I'll probably go on to chapter 7 now. Peace.